Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom with our host, Bob Olson, who will now introduce today's show and speaker.
WCAT Radio presents I Thought You'd Like to Know This Too, which is our Friday edition of I Thought You'd Like to Know This, a program which features many interesting people who have a message for you today. And today we have a very interesting person. She calls herself the Story Lady, and her name is Joyce Marie Rayno. Joyce Marie, it's good to have you with us tonight.
Well, I'm very glad to be here. This is the first time I'm doing a radio broadcast.
Isn't that
so
nice?
It's an adventure for me.
Good. And I want to start out by asking you if you were born a Catholic.
Yes, I was.
And tell us a little bit about how you were brought up as a Catholic, would you?
Oh, I would like to do that. And at one point, I would like to tell you how I became a storyteller. I don't know if you'd prefer to do it a little bit later in the program.
Yeah, why don't you do what
yes.
you have about your
family
brought up as a Catholic, and then you can go
sure.
and tell how you became a storyteller.
Okay. All right. Well, the first part is as a Catholic, I was the second girl of 5 girls. My father and mother had 5 daughters, and they called us their 5 roses. And as we grew up, my father used to laugh and make a joke that he loved us all, even with the thorns, because we were a one-bathroom family and 5 girls. You can imagine, my poor dad. But anyway,
interesting,
I went
Joyce,
to a
because I also had 5 daughters.
Do you really?
Yeah. And
that is nice.
5 daughters, just like your family.
Oh my gosh! That's so nice. Thank you for saying that.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I went to a parochial school, except for kindergarten, because they didn't have one then, at St. Anne's School in Bristol, Connecticut. And I also graduated from there, and I made all my sacraments at St. Anne's School in Bristol. I received all of my sacraments there. We were a very close-knit family. We were grown up to love Jesus, God, and to always know that no matter what our problems were, that we could always speak to Jesus, even if we couldn't speak to our mother or father about them, that Jesus was always there, and he made no judgments, but he just wanted to help us to stay on the right path. And I don't know if there's more than that you need to know for preliminaries.
No, that was good. Now, how did you become a storyteller?
Well, that is a longer story, and it happened later on. Well, I can add this part. My father also went to St. Anne's School in Bristol, and he had a nun, and it was more like in the latter grades, I would guess 6th and 7th. And her name, she was a French school, and her name was Sister Mary Misericordia. And she would reward the students with their good behavior by telling them stories. So one of the stories I'm going to tell you later was one that my father heard as a child from St. Anne's School.
Wow.
And we grew up hearing that story, my sisters and I, because it was a story that told a good lesson that people and teenagers especially need to hear. And so we would always be, if we started to waver from the straight and narrow path, we would be reminded of the story. So anyway, so back to how I became a storyteller. When I was very little, I think I was bubbly and probably got in a lot of trouble because I wasn't too obedient. But as I got older, I became much more like I should have been. However, I ended up becoming very nervous and afraid. at this point in my life, I was now grown up and married, and nervous and afraid. I had all good blessings from God, and all of our children. We had 4 children, my husband and I, all, of course, baptized Catholic, and they also were close together as a family unit. We were. They're older now, and they're off on their own. But I would always worry that something was going to happen to them, or if the phone rang, I became obsessive. My children used to buy me books for Christmas, How Not to Worry, or they'd get little jokes like a rocking chair, you can rock, but you're not going to get anywhere, and that's like worrying. Am I going too fast?
No, you're doing fine.
Okay, good.
But now, in your family, were you the oldest, or middle, or last,
oldest.
or what?
I was the second oldest.
Second oldest?
Yep.
And then how many children did you have?
I had 4 children, and...
Not 4 daughters, though?
No, 2 and 2. 2 girls and 2 boys.
All right.
Yeah.
So you were talking about your sisters, and then how you were trying to help your mother not to worry.
No, I was.
You were the one that.
I was the one that was worrying.
Right.
I was the one that was worrying,
and
my children used to get me the books. So I'm now. Well, if I say that I started telling stories about 30 years ago, so this was probably about 28 years ago. 27 years ago, and my children were going off where they weren't home underneath me every day, and I had more time on my hands, and so I became more worried because I wasn't busy taking care of kids. My house was always pretty clean, and so I felt like God must be very unhappy with me because He gave me all these blessings. And I was like an ungrateful child because I kept worrying that something was going to go bad. So I went to see a priest. At one time, I saw 2 different priests. Father McCarthy from Bristol was the first priest I saw, and he suggested I keep a journal and write down, after prayer time and everything, what my thoughts were. And I told them, they're getting worse. So I didn't like doing the journal. And then I went on a retreat at Holy Passionist Fathers in Holy, I can't remember the name of it.
Holy Family.
Yeah. And I went on a retreat there. And I brought all my journals with me. And I'll try to make it fast. And so
No, take your time. You're doing fine.
Okay. So I gave him... his name was Father Ehrenheim, and I was still so scared, and so everything I did I would be afraid of. So I took these journals, and I left. I had eaten supper, and I left them on the floor at his office, and I put a note on it. After you read these, you probably won't want to see me. Isn't it funny? I look at it now and I laugh, but at that time it was very sad,
Yeah.
And so he didn't come and call for me like I thought he would do. We ate a meal in a group together, and I'm thinking he's evaluating me. He wants to see just what kind of a nutcase I am. Nothing. He never came to me. And it was 3-day retreat in Our Lady of Calvary in Farmington. And on Sunday we were going to have Mass, and they had confession before. Or, and you can also, no confession. So I go there, and I'm waiting, and I don't want to go up. Everybody has now gone to confession but me, and I'm just sitting there. He comes out, Father Ehrenheim, with his little index finger, motions for me to come here. Come on. And I went up, and I don't know what I said to him, but he said to me, I've been waiting for you. And what he told me was, he asked me questions like if my father and mother were only good to me or only did not like me if I misbehaved. Oh, no. I said I could do anything. I knew that all my life, you know. He kind of was trying to figure out why I was worrying.
Yeah.
And he said, it's very hard to tell a person who worries not to worry, but I want you to try something. He says, when you start to worry, I want you to tell yourself, I will try not to worry. And I forget how many words that was, 5 or 6. And so he said, just keep telling yourself whenever you do it. Well, let me tell you, Bob, I was telling myself that waking morning, noon, and night. I will try not to worry. I will try not to worry. I will try not to worry. Yeah. And he said, Father Ehrenheim said, while you're saying those words, you're breaking your pattern of worrying. And so it was. I did that. And right after that, I said, I have too much. My mind is too empty. I'm going to get a part-time job. I didn't want to be a secretary. I'd been there. What do I like to do? Well, I won't go through all that, but I said I love books. I'm going to go to the library. This is an important part of the story. So I go to the library in Southbury, and the way they take applications is you have to go to the town hall, pick them up, fill them out, and then send them back. So I went to the town hall. I have them on the dashboard of my card, my application, and I'm driving home, and it's an open field, and there's a stable there. And I see the application fly up off the dashboard and out the window and float across the whole corral of stables. And I just watched it go. I slowed down. I looked up. I know I did this. I can see myself. I looked up toward the heavens, and I said, well, I guess you don't want me to work at the library. Let me know what next. And that's, from then on, I let go and let God.
Beautiful.
And he told me about, I went to a bookstore. This is also important. It's not much longer. I went to a bookstore that I used to go to, and I asked previously about a job. Anyway, I went to the library and I got a book, and it's a children's book on being a storyteller. No, not a reference book. And its title was Children's Faces Looking Up. And I went to order the book because I couldn't take it out of the library. And she looked at it, and this lady only knew me because a few months before I was there looking for a job. And she said, I'm a storyteller. Oh, my goodness, she said. Never heard me tell a story. She says, you got to call this lady. And she says she's the director of the Storytelling Center in New London. And she says, and we have one in Greenwich. You have to come. I'll pick you up. I'll take you there. I'll give you my stories. And for, I think it was like November until the end of the summer, because she moved to Japan, she never once heard me tell a story, but she encouraged me like she was God, but she encouraged me like I could do it. I could be. She never questioned it. You want to be a storyteller? Here, this is what you got to do. And I told my very first story at that storytelling festival, and I had been on tranquilizers. And they said, anybody who wants to try, and I said, I want to try, but I'm too scared. I'm shaking and everything else. And one of the guys says, Joyce, I told my first story here last year. He says, you don't have to be afraid. So I went out to the water fountain. I said, okay, I'll do it. And I had the tranquilizer between my fingers, and I was going to take, I don't know, the whole thing or half, I don't know. But I looked, and I said, I've been praying to God, and if I take this, it was a Valium, if I take this now, I will have to have one for the rest of my life. So I put it back in my pocketbook, and I went out, and I told the story, and that was it. I said, that's what God wants me to do.
Wow.
So it is a spiritual journey. It was definitely a spiritual journey. And I love storytelling. I've had some hard knocks in my life since then, but I don't worry about the things that don't happen. And I deal with the ones that do. And I didn't know I was going to do that, but I guess that's what God did.
That was a beautiful story. Do you remember what story you told, that first one?
Yes. It was about, I think this is part of my stroke right now. What's the animal that sleeps is lazy? There's an animal that sleeps a lot. He's from Australia. Oh, my goodness. I guess I don't remember it.
Okay.
Lazy toke. That was the name of it, lazy toke. That was the name of it, lazy toke.
Yeah, you got it.
Yep, that was the name of it. Yep. So
that's
my background.
That's how you got started.
Yes, yes.
And you said later you're going to tell us that story that your dad used to listen to, and that would have been.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. I have
how many? When did? Let's see. How many years would that have been? That would have been many years, huh?
What? That my father told the story?
No, that your father, when that nun told your father that story.
Yes. As a matter of fact, as a grown-up adult, okay, my younger sister, Marilyn, I'm 70, I just turned 79,
okay.
I think I did. It could be, it's close enough.
Right.
And she's 3 years younger than I am. And when she was maybe about 9 years old, she played the role. They made her, the Nuns of the Assumption, made her a habit because my father wanted to honor this nun, Sister Mary Misericordia, and kind of told the story of her life. And my little sister played the part of the nun, and she wore that. So that gives you some idea, you know.
Well, that was back in the 70s then.
Yeah. But but the nun, either she had just died. I don't think she died though at that point. But she was an old lady. She's old like me now.
Yeah.
You know, she was probably my age then.
So what's your first story today?
Well, the first story I want to tell you today is called Old Joe and the Carpenter.
Old Joe and the Carpenter.
Yeah, Old Joe, Joe, and the Carpenter.
Sounds wonderful.
Okay, so I'll just start telling it right now.
That's good.
Is that what you'd like me to do?
Okay. Yes.
Old Joe, he lived way out in the West, way out in the country, and it seemed like he had but one good neighbor. Their children had grown up, and the children were all in other lands, raising their own families, and it seemed like all that old Joe had left was his farm and his neighbor. That's all they had, each other. And then one day, they had an argument. It was a silly argument. It was over a stray calf who had wandered over onto the neighbor's property, and each one thought it to be their own. And old Joe, he'd look at that neighbor and he'd say, now, look at that. He's got the same markings as my favorite calf, and I reckon it to be my own. Well, they were both very stubborn, and they began to quarrel about who it belonged to. And the upshot of the whole thing was that they stopped talking to each other. And it seemed like a dark cloud had settled over old Joe's head. few days after, old Joe looks outside, and his neighbor had gone over, dug a trench right along the property line with his tractor and his hoe, And old Joe thought, he wants us separated like that. Like that. Well, about a week after that happened, there came a knock on old Joe's door. Old Joe wasn't expecting anybody, and when he opened the door, there, standing before him, was a young man. He had dark, deep-set eyes, and he was holding on his shoulder a box of wooden tools, and he had a soft, gentle voice. And he looked at old Joe and he said, "I'm a carpenter, and I was wondering if you had any work for me to do around the place." Now, old Joe was not the type to just hire anybody on the spot. So he invited the man into his house, and they sat down. Old Joe brewed a cup of fresh coffee. They had some muffins and home, freshly churned butter, and they were sitting there eating and talking. And old Joe said to himself, "I like this young man." So he looked at the carpenter, and he stood up and he said, "I do have a job for you to do. Look over there. Come over here by my window. See that farm over there? You see that trench? That weren't there next week. Well, my neighbor, he did that to spite me. Gol darn him anyway. If he wants us separated like that, I want you to do me one better. I want you to build me a fence, a great big, tall fence. And then I won't even have to look at this place no more. Gol darn him anyhow." And the carpenter said, "I can do a job that will please you." He says, "I have my tools." And old Joe said, "I have the lumber and the nails." So old Joe brought the carpenter down by where the creek had been dug, and he got into his truck and he drove off. Now, excuse me, the carpenter began his work, and he did his measuring and his hammering, and it was just about nightfall when the carpenter was finishing up his work. And that's just about the time that old Joe came up in his wagon. It was a wagon. And he came up in his wagon. And when he did, his mouth fell open because there wasn't a fence there at all. It was a bridge from one side of the creek to the other. And there coming across that bridge was his neighbor with his arms outstretched toward old Joe. And old Joe, he started to walk over there across that bridge. He went over to his neighbor and he said, "Oh, I just want to be your friend." And the neighbor said, "That's all I want to be too." And old Joe said, "I know that calf weren't mine. I just wanted to say that to spite you." And as they were making up, old Joe noticed that the carpenter had picked up his box of wooden tools, hoisted it back up on his shoulder, and was starting to walk away. And old Joe called out, No, don't go on. I got more work for you to do." And the carpenter, he turned and he looked at old Joe, and he said, "I'd like to stay, Joe, but you see, I can't. I have more bridges to build." And that is the story of old Joe and the carpenter.
What a beautiful story.
Yeah, I like that. It's one of my favorites.
Now, where do you get your stories, or do you make these up, or how does it work?
I've only made up a few stories, and they're usually made up for a reason. But no, I got this probably out of a book. It's in a lot of books, storytelling books, I've had it for a long time. When I first began storytelling, I liked it because I loved the message, and it was a short story.
It's interesting that you would choose that story for the first one, because I'm going to tell you a story now.
Oh, good.
That was true. A true story.
All right.
Very similar to what you just told. And it's about a Catholic lay evangelist. His name was Charlie Osborne. You may have heard of him. He was down in Pensacola, Florida.
Uh-huh.
And he and his wife had a gourmet Italian restaurant there. I think it was his wife's family that owned the restaurant. But I think they had turned it over to Charlie and his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And they had children at home, but they were working all day at this restaurant, so they asked the neighbor to watch their children during the day when they were working.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of babysitting,
Yes.
And after about 3 years, they found out that the neighbor had been abusing his children.
Oh.
All right? So Charlie just went bonkers. And he was trying to do anything to have this man killed or put in prison or something because of what he did to his children.
Right.
And he was bad-mouthing him all over town and wherever he went and so forth. And a priest got a hold of Charlie. Father Smith, I think was his name. And he said, Charlie, he says, you're a murderer. And he said, well, what do you mean? He said, yeah, this man did something very bad, but you're destroying his reputation wherever you go. You're murdering his reputation.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you're going to have to forgive him. He says, me forgive him? He said, yes, that's your responsibility. You have to go to him. And Charlie now, just like what you told in the story, he not only had bad-mouthed his neighbor all over town, but see, they lived right next to each other, and Charlie had a wall built between his house and the neighbor.
Oh, okay.
Just like your story.
Yeah, yeah.
He had a big wall, so he couldn't even see the neighbor's house. It was more than a fence. It was actually a wall.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And he didn't ever want to see him again or his house or anything else. But the priest got to him. And one day, Charlie finally was convicted.
Mm-hmm.
He went over to the neighbor's house. He rapped on the door. The neighbor came to the door, and Charlie says, I want to forgive you for all the things I said about you and all the things I did against you.
Wow.
And that was the end of that, except that a week later, Charlie's wife met this man in the grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I thought you'd like to know that I gave my heart to Jesus today.
Oh.
And a week later, he died.
Oh, my gosh. Oh. This is
like
a true story?
True story.
Wow. Wow.
Well, he tells it all over.
Yeah.
And that's not exactly like your story, but it's very similar, isn't it?
It is. It is very, very coincidental. Not coincidental, right?
Oh, but it's just interesting that you picked that story today.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Very good. So, 30 years you've been doing this, and where do you do it?
Oh my goodness, all over. A lot of libraries, parks, schools. I do a lot in historical societies. I do quite a bit there with, like, Connecticut folk tales. Also, there's, let me see, they have this, it's called The American Girls. If you have granddaughters, you might have heard about it. They're dolls.
Yes, I've seen
Have you heard of them? Yeah.
Yes.
And they come with their stories, each doll. There's quite a few now. I think I have the 14 classic dolls. And,
wow.
And I travel with them, and I tell excerpts from their stories, the stories that were written, you know, to go with the dolls in their books. And I, because a whole book is pretty long, I kind of have to abridge it and get it shorter. But I do a lot of American Girl storytelling. I have costume stories. One of them that before I had the stroke, I was known as the Beautiful Witch of Woodbury. Because there really was in the 1600s, a girl, a lady, and she ended up being called the Witch of Woodbury, and she was a beautiful girl. And I tried to get facts from historical records, but there was not too much about her and her husband. They raised horses. But anyway, I do her story. A lot of storytellers like that. I did a lot of preschool stories when I first started, but I seem to have gotten away from that, and I tell more stories like I just told you, you know, or
that story is good for
adult stories, you know, for older children.
Beautiful message.
For older children and grown-ups. I do a lot of grown-up storytelling, too.
Okay.
So I have fun doing it, and I'm very thankful.
That's a beautiful, beautiful vocation, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So do you have another story for us?
Sure. I have no idea what time it is, so.
Oh, we've been going for over a half hour.
Okay, so I brought within my mind, inside of me, a few stories so I could judge the length of them, you know.
Yeah.
I have one thing. I think I mentioned it to you already, that it's difficult because I'm used to telling stories to face with people.
Yes.
So it's very hard for me to. I had to close my eyes because I was seeing my house instead of the story. Isn't that funny?
Came through beautifully.
Oh, good. But I'm just saying that I noticed that as I was telling it, and I'm thinking, oh, because I didn't even realize I did this. But when I tell the story, I'm not there. I'm in the story, and I'm picturing the people.
Yeah.
Just that story I just told you, I could see my lamps, I could see the piano. I got to close my eyes because I'm getting distracted. It was funny. I never had that happen before. So I'm between two stories. Like I said, I got a few of them.
Well, I'll never forget the one you told today. I mean, it's a beautiful story, and it has a tremendous message for all of us.
Yeah. So let me think about. I'll leave it up to the good Lord a little bit. I have.
All right.
Let me see. Unless I can do two. Let me see. Okay, I'm looking at a grain of rice right in front of me. Okay, I went and got my little. When I tell this story, it's called a grain of rice. Okay, and when I tell this story, I have a wooden bowl, and I bring the grains of rice so that people could see. And I have them if they're old enough, and if they're not in a convalescent home, I tell them to feel free to pick up the rice, hold it, and if they want, they could keep a grain, because a grain of rice is very, very small. And that's the name of the story, a grain of rice. And I'm ready to tell it. Are you ready to listen?
I'm ready.
Okay. This story is from India, I believe. And it's about a king, the king. And there was this king, and he was well known because he was a good king. And he had also had 4 daughters. And now his daughters were older and they were grown up. And their father, the king, thought it was time that he went on a journey to see if he could find out and learn more about life and about God. So he called his 4 daughters together, and he told them that he was going on a journey. He didn't know how long he would be gone, and he didn't know if he would even return. And all of the children said, "Oh, Father, don't go. Please stay. We can't. We need you." And he said, "No, you will be able to rule in my stead, but I have a gift that I want to give you, and it is my prayer that you will learn the meaning of the gift." And then his 4 daughters gathered around him, and he took a single grain of rice, and he placed it in the palm of each daughter's hand. And the oldest daughter, she looked at that grain of rice, thinking about the significance of it. And she thought for a moment. And then she ran upstairs. She tied a beautiful long golden thread around that rice. And she went and she hid it. Excuse me. I kind of mixed up on that. It's very important that I tell you that their father embraced all of his 4 daughters first, and then he left. And it was then that the oldest daughter, took the rice, went upstairs, and she tied this beautiful long golden thread around it, and she placed it on the table right next to her bed. And every day that her father was gone, she would look at that rice and how it just, the thread with the gold on it seemed to sparkle. The second daughter, she took her grain of rice and she held it close to her chest, and she stood, watched, looked around, up and down, and very slowly and carefully she held that rice close to herself and walked up the stairs to her room. And when she got to her room, again she looked all the way around, and then she took that rice and hid it under the bed. And every day that her father was gone, she would look to make sure the rice was there. The third daughter, she looked at that grain of rice and she kind of snickered. It was just an ordinary grain of rice, and so she tossed it over her shoulder. The youngest daughter, she looked at that grain of rice, and she thought of what her father said about learning the significance of the rice. So she thought about it for almost a year, and then she realized it's a seed, and so she planted the rice. And every day that her father was gone, she would go take care of the rice fields. She harvested the rice. She kept some for her small kingdom and for their family. And then she reharvested the rest. Now when the father returned some years later, his eyes were illuminated. He had learned so much. And his hair was long. And he was so happy to see his 4 daughters. And after he greeted them all, he asked about seeing the gift that he had given them, that he left for their safekeeping. And the oldest daughter, she smiled and jumped and ran upstairs. She got that rice with the beautiful golden thread, came downstairs and said, "Look, Father, here it is. I checked every single day to make sure it was there. And the father looked at it, and he bowed to his daughter, and he said, thank you. The second daughter, she very shyly, very quietly, and she kept herself close together, and she kind of like sneaked upstairs, made sure nobody was watching, and then she went into the bed, and she got the rice. She came down, and very carefully she placed it in her father's hand. And her father, he looked at the rice, and he said, thank you. The third daughter, she was the pragmatic one who threw it over her shoulder. She had to hurry down into the kitchen and take out the rice bag. And she came out and she said, Father, here is a grain of rice. And he smiled and he said, thank you. The youngest daughter came before her father and she said, Father, I do not have the grain of rice that you gave me. I thought about it for almost a year, and I realized it was a seed. So I planted it. And Father, come here. If you will come and look out this window, you will see the rice, the fields of rice out there, and they are all the result of that one grain of rice. Every year I would harvest it. I would keep enough for our kingdom and our family, and then I would reharvest it. Come and look and see the results of that single grain of rice. And her father walked out and he looked out that window, and that's all he could see, fields and fields of rice. And he looked at his youngest daughter, and he removed the crown from his head, and he placed it on hers. And he said, you indeed have learned the meaning of rule. And it is said that the youngest daughter ruled the kingdom just like her father did, and she ruled it well, and everybody loved her. And she also gave all of her sisters a prominent place in the kingdom. And that's all the story of a grain of rice. Thank you. Are you there?
Wonderful story, Joyce. And it reminds me of the scripture story about the talents, you remember?
Right, exactly, yes.
Yeah.
I think it came from a storytelling book, on religious type stories, yeah.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. And you mentioned about being at nursing homes. Have you ever told these stories at nursing homes?
Yes. I've had some interesting experiences there.
Tell me what some of the reactions are. Now, could they all understand it and everything?
No. When I first started storytelling, I did that like for a friend, okay? Mm-hmm. And state law requires that when they have a program, whether or not the people understand what's going on, that if they want to go, you can bring them or you should bring them. So there were very many people that didn't know what was going on, and during your story program they might shout out or speak or, right. No relation to the story. However, there were many times when you thought that little lady in the corner, she was in La La Land. In the one story I remember, you probably heard it, little orphan Annie has come to our house to stay, to wipe away and the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. You remember that?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. Well, I was doing that. It was at Halloween time, and I was doing that. And as I'm telling the story, as I get to that, the lady in the back who you never heard started singing the whole song. And the goblins will get you if you don't watch out. And then she knew the rest of the rhyme.
There you go.
And that was like so beautiful, And then a lot of times, if there was a dog or a cat in the story, they would always remind the people that were patients there, and then they would start telling stories about their dogs or their cats. Yeah, I thought that was kind of neat, too.
Beautiful.
How they did that.
The reason I ask that is because I do a prayer meeting once a week over in Willimantic.
Okay.
And I go there every Tuesday. And it's interesting what you said. I experienced the same thing.
Yeah.
But I had this fellow, I played a lot of music because I have a good career, and I have Christian music, and I could see that people were actually mouthing the words,
Mhm. You think they're not, but
I could see their mouths moving. They didn't sing, but you could see they knew the songs. But there was this one fella, and he was in a wheelchair, and he was laying like in a recliner. He was just laying there, and he had his eyes closed, and you wouldn't think he knew anything that was going on. But as that music was playing, you could see his little right foot down there on the chair, the
wheelchair or the
wheelchair. Yeah, the wheelchair.
Oh.
You could see his little foot, and it was tapping toward to the music.
See? Yeah.
Yeah.
True that. It is very interesting.
We had another fellow was playing this song, and he never really came into the recreation room, but he would run up and down the halls with his wheelchair. And I was playing this one song, and apparently he could hear it in the hall, and he said a line from that song, and one of the girls who worked there heard him. And it's the first time that he had ever said anything. Never spoke a word.
Oh.
And we found all kinds of things like that. But I was wondering maybe sometime you could come with me to Willimantic and maybe tell a few of your stories there, because there are a number of people, I think, that would really enjoy them.
Good. Yeah, I would love to do that. Yeah, I did that. I went to play. You know what happened? Oh, my goodness, I forgot about this. My oldest 4 grandchildren, Heather, Sarah, Tony, and Kayla, those 4, they would come with me for storytelling. Not to, this particular time it was a nursing home, but they loved to tell stories with me. And so they had come to different places. But this one time we went to a nursing home, and it was a smaller nursing home. It was almost like just a nursing room or something, whatever. But I know I did not like this experience myself. So we go there, and I have my 4 little grandkids, and we're going to do it. Well, there was one man who, I'm sure he meant nothing, no evil intent. It was his way. But he would follow us wherever we walked, but he followed us like really too close, very close. Yeah. And unfortunately, after that experience, the kids did not want to come again.
Oh, no.
I told them, well, he didn't mean, he was just, he's sick, he doesn't know what he's doing. But they didn't want to go, and they had told their, 2 different mothers, we told them after, and they said they don't want their kids going, so they didn't go anymore. However, they, I still, at schools and all, well, no, they didn't tell it to schools, but I told it all their schools all the years till they were older. But, and that was the only time that I ever, and it bothered me. Maybe if the kids weren't there, he wouldn't have even followed me, but he was following me too. And it was very, was unusual, to say the least.
Yeah, well, we see those kinds of things, and it's hard for children to understand that those people, because they can be just wonderful one day, and then the next they change,
You this has nothing to do with my storytelling or your storytelling, but it has to do with the talk, what we're talking about. My grandson is 9 years old, and this happened just a few months ago. And, I lose track of the words that I want to say.
That's all right.
He was telling me, Babchi, he says, I'm doing this class. It's like you choose it. You have a free period. And it's becoming more, when you're understanding of other people, there's a word for that. When you can put yourself in their shoes. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't have to come up with the word, but you know what I mean. And I said, well, like what? He says, well, the teacher was telling us this is a really true story, Babchi. They call me Babchi. This is a really true story, he said. And he was telling me how this girl was born and all the physical handicaps she had. And she couldn't walk, and she had a wheelchair and all that. And she was born that way. And he says now, she is able to work, so she must be 16. And he says, and you know what they do, Babchi? They drive her so that she could work in the store. And when you go to stores, how you see these people that help out that have been handicapped?
Yes.
And it was like so beautiful to hear this from my grandson, that he was so impressed with what they do nowadays for kids, for people. I don't know. Did I make myself clear?
Yeah, that was wonderful.
Yeah. But it's people are handicapped.
Right. Well, we have time for one more story.
Though. Huh?
We have time for one more story.
Okay, how long a story?
Well, we've got about 10 minutes left.
Okay. I have to choose again.
Don't worry, because if it goes over or it's a little shorter, it'd be okay too.
Okay, I have two questions for you.
Yes.
One of the stories is the story you already heard about Feathers in the Wind. And the other one is about King Solomon. And it's called, I think I might like that one.
All right.
Today.
I'll go for that.
Pardon me?
I'll go for that.
Okay. I'll try it. There's no really anything to say ahead of time before this one. Oh, actually, no. I'm going to tell you the other one. I just thought of why. I'm going to tell you Feathers in the Wind, because that's the story my father always told us when we were
kids. Is that the one that the lady...
Yeah, I got to tell you that one.
Told him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think I should tell you that one, the Feathers in the Wind. And I have feathers here because for the people who are listening, when I tell, like with the rice, I bring the rice when I tell the story of the rice.
Yes,
sometimes you just have to see it, And so I bring some feathers, and I usually have pretty colored ones, but depending on the theme of the story program.
I
hold them in the palm of my hand, and then I gently blow
at my father's house.
What?
You did it at my father's house.
Right. And so for your listeners, you have to imagine just a little light puff from your mouth, blow, and the feathers just go all over.
Good.
And so this is called Feathers in the Wind.
Mm-hmm.
Once there was a young man, and he understood most of the law. He understood the commandments. He knew it was wrong to steal and wrong to kill. But there was one commandment he did not quite understand. Why is it wrong to slander your neighbor? And he thought about this, and he decided that he would go to the rabbi, and he would ask the rabbi. And so he did, and he bowed down. Rabbi. And he explained how he understood all the commandments, except for this one. And the rabbi, he nodded his head, and he said, I will give you the answer. But first, I want you to get a sack and fill it with feathers. And then I want you to go throughout the village and place a single feather at each doorstep in the village. Now, that young man thought this was pretty silly, but this was the rabbi, and the rabbi was a learned man. So he bowed to the rabbi, and he left. He went and he got a great big sack. He filled it with feathers, and then he went throughout the village, and at each house he placed a single feather at each doorstep. And when he was finished, he ran back to the rabbi, and he bowed to the rabbi. Rabbi, I have done what you have asked. Now you may give me the answer. And the rabbi looked at the young man and said, but first you must collect the feathers. And with that, the young man's face fell open, and he said, what? How could I do that? The wind will have blown them away. And the rabbi said, that is your answer. The feathers are like the words that we say. And once they're said against a neighbor or anyone, they're impossible to retrieve. And that is the story of Feathers in the Wind.
That's one of my favorites.
Yeah. Well, that's the one that my father, that the nun, one of the ones the nun taught him.
That's beautiful.
And that he kept telling us, so I thought that was appropriate.
And what a great story for young people, huh?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, like you said, you had 4 daughters. So,
Five.
You meant 5. I'm sorry. That's right. I got that mixed up. I've got 4 sisters.
Yeah, that's right.
But they, a lot of times, how girls are, and my mother and father would say, remember the feathers, like that. So we always had to be quiet and make sure we didn't say anything bad, spread bad stuff. So
I had
very short.
Before you told that story, I had seen that story. I don't know if I didn't hear anybody telling it. I think I must have read it somewhere. Because I recognized that when you did it, and it was so beautiful.
That book, you've heard of Chicken Soup for the Soul books?
Yes.
They have a lot of stories like that in there. Now, I don't know how much time you want me to try telling that King Solomon story.
Yeah. I think there's time to do it.
Okay, I will try, and that can be our last one.
But thank you. That's the story that the nun told many years ago.
Which one?
Father, the one that you just did.
Oh, the feathers?
That's so great. I'm glad you told that.
Well, I like I said, I changed my mind because I told you the story about my father and mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Okay, so
King Solomon.
A legend of King Solomon. Benares was King Solomon's captain of the guard. And Benares, he just loved to do anything for King Solomon. Whatever King Solomon wished for, he was able to fulfill with great love and admiration and respect. But one day, King Solomon overheard Benares telling his friends that whatever King Solomon wants, I get it for him. And Solomon thought that Benares was needing a little lesson in humility because he was not used to hearing him brag or anything. He always did his job right up top. So King Solomon said to himself that he will give a task to Benares that will be impossible to complete. And so he called Benares before him. And he said, I would like you to get me to find me the magical ring. A ring that can make a sad person happy and a happy person sad. Now Benares had never heard of such a ring, but he bowed down before King Solomon And he said, I will begin now. I will search the world over if I have to, but I will get you that ring. And then he left. King Solomon told Benares he had 6 months to do so. And so Benares left and he journeyed all around the world. He went to seaports. He went here and there looking for this ring, this magical ring that would make a happy person sad and a sad person happy. But he could not find one anywhere. No one had ever heard of anything like that. He went to the caravans as they came into cities, and he would check in the caravans, and still no one had heard of it. And as time was getting scarce, because he had just 6 months, and he had been traveling, and he was losing hope, and he was feeling very sad that he couldn't find it. But still, he kept on searching. And it was the day before he had to report to King Solomon, and he had not found the ring. He was so sad and disheartened that he could not please the king. He decided to go back to Jerusalem, and he was going to look through all those caravans again. And he did. He went to all the shops, and as he's going along, once again, no luck. Finally, he was going by, and there was this young, ragged-looking boy, and he was barefoot, and all he had were some rings and bracelets. They were spread out on a blanket on the ground, and he was just going to go right by them, but Benares said to himself, I can't leave any stone unturned. So he turned around a little bit and went back to the ragged-looking boy, and he described the ring he was looking for, a ring that would make a sad person happy and a happy person sad. And the lad just shook his head. No, I have never heard of it. And tears welled up into Benares' eyes. And then, from the shadows where the young lad was, came across, walking on the grass, was an old man. He was the boy's grandfather. And he came up to Benares and he said, I might have the ring you are looking for. And Benares lifted his face and he shook his head. And the grandfather went and he took a simple band of gold. He worked on it, did some engraving, and then he handed it to Benares. Benares read what the grandfather had written on it, and immediately his sad face became happy. And he said, this is the ring. I am sure this is the ring. And he thanked the old man, and he hurried back. And the next morning when he went to King Solomon's place, and everything was there, and everybody was happy, and there was joy and gaiety, and people were talking and everything. And when King Solomon saw Benares standing there, he knew what he was going to hear. So he went over to Benares, and Benares, he reached into his pocket, and he took out the ring, and he handed it to King Solomon. And King Solomon's happy face turned, and he knew this was the ring. It would make a happy person sad, and a sad person happy, because when he read the Hebrew letters that the old man had engraved on the ring, he read, this too shall pass. And so it was that King Solomon went over, took the ring, put his arms around Benares and hugged him and said, I am so sorry that I put you through the test. And then King Solomon took off his own ring and gave it to Benares. And he put on his hand, on his finger, the ring that said, "This too shall pass." And he wore that ring, that simple band of gold, all for the remainder of his life. And it helped him even more to be a wise king. This too shall pass. And that's the end of the story.
Wow.
You like that one too?
I love it.
Me too.
I love that story.
I had fun. I picked out all my favorite stories, short
Beautiful.
stories.
Well, think about it. We're out of time. It went so fast, didn't it?
It did go fast after I stopped looking, after I closed my eyes.
Yeah. Well, we've been listening to the story lady, Joyce Marie Rayno, who has been doing this for years, over 30 years. And she calls herself the story lady, and that's a good name for you, Joyce. It was beautiful. And
thank you.
We have to do this again sometime. So, and I'd like to have you help.
Do I have another minute, Bob? Huh?
I'd like to have you help me at the nursing home sometime too.
Sure. Do I have another minute?
You have one more question?
Yes, I have one more thing I'd like to say. You are calling me the story lady. I must tell you what my business card says. All right? Myths.
All right.
Myths, M-Y-T-H-S, mysteries, miracles. That's
mysteries,
miracles. I have the 3 words, and they're just like a dash separating them. Myths, mysteries, miracles.
Oh, myths. Okay.
Yeah, M-Y-T-H-S.
So you call yourself that too? Myths, mysteries, miracles.
Well, I don't call myself anything. That's just what my business card says.
Oh, okay.
I just go by Joyce Marie Rayno, but I will send you one of my cards anyway.
But I mean, the card is it's kind of like, it is a name though, right? Mysteries, miracles?
Yes. That's the name that I gave to my whatever. That's the kind of stories, I guess. I liked it.
I like it.
Yeah.
And I noticed when you answer the phone, you say the story lady.
I do?
Yeah. I think
I say you reach the home of Storyteller.
Oh, Storyteller, okay.
Yeah. Because I don't call myself story lady. But
it's not story lady, okay, it's Storyteller.
Yeah, because when you said that, I just figured that was the name you gave me, but just now you said I call myself the story lady.
Oh, no, but you say the Storyteller.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it just seemed like...
I liked it because I'm a lady, too.
It seemed to fit, the story lady, but anyway, next time I'll call you the Storyteller.
You can call me story lady, but I didn't want you to have the wrong, like that's what I call myself.
I got it.
Yes.
Well, we'll try to do this again sometime. We've been listening to some terrific stories from Joyce Marie Rayno. And
that's right.
We will be back with you with another interesting person next week, same time, same station. And in the meantime, may God bless each and every one of you in the name of the Father, the Son,
and of the
Holy Spirit.
And the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Bob.
Thank you, Joyce. Good night.
I enjoyed it.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.